Well, good morning, everybody. It's good to be with all of you this morning. Let's just admit it today that the Bible can be sometimes really weird, right? You read some of the stuff in the Bible and you're just like, what in the world just happened, right? And so in this series, we've been practicing how to say this series, right? So you got to say it, wait, what? Okay, so we're going to count on the count of three. We're going to say it all together. You ready for this? 1, 2, 3. Wait, what? Exactly. So the Bible has all kinds of these wait, what moments. And so I think in the Bible specifically that the Old Testament has some of the weirdest stuff in it. It's just straight up weird, right? And then if you drill down even further into the Old Testament, I think that the Old Testament prophets have some of the weirdest stuff in them. For example, did you know that Jeremiah, when he preached, he wore a big heavy wooden yoke for the oxen. He wore it on himself as he preached. Did you know that about Jeremiah? Just weird stuff right there. Did you know the prophet Ezekiel, that for 390 days he laid on his left side on the ground? And then for 40 more days, he flipped over and laid on his right side, all the while playing with a miniature model of Jerusalem and pretending to lay siege to it. That's just weird, right? So this brother just basically laid on the floor and played with Legos, right? That's what he did. So how about this one? Did you know that the prophet Isaiah, that he actually walked around barefoot and naked as he preached for 3 years? See, now if I did that today, I would get arrested and none of you would come back, especially my family. They'd be so embarrassed, right? So when you read the books of the Bible, especially in the prophets, you see that God calls these prophets to do some really weird things with their lives that make us stop and say, wait, what did he just do? And I think when we read these parts in the Bible, we can do one of two things, okay? We have one of two options. First, like many people do, we just sort of skim over it. We just sort of skip over these and we just say, that's, cultural stuff, back then stuff, historical, maybe some of that supernatural stuff. I'm not into it, right? So when we do that, we sort of miss out on the things that God might want to teach us, the why behind these weird stories. So today I want to take the road less traveled and be able to kind of figure out the why behind this weird story in Hosea. So that's where we're going to be, the prophet Hosea. And if you want to turn there in your Bibles, you can go there now. And we're going to be in that book that also bears his name. So Hosea begins like this, chapter 1, verse 1. The word of the Lord that came to Hosea, the son of Beeri, in the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah, and in the days of Jeroboam, the son of Joash, king of Israel. That is a mouthful. Right? So let me explain to you what's happening. Often in the Old Testament, many of the events are listed by their proximity to a certain king's reign. So what we can figure out from just this first verse, looking back through the lens of history, with that list of names there, is that Hosea was one of the last prophets to preach to the northern kingdom of Israel. So get this context here. God, for hundreds of years, have been trying over and over and over to speak to the people of Israel, but they just would not listen. They wouldn't listen. Even though God created them to be a special group of people, to be set apart for a special purpose, they kept kind of abandoning their relationship with God and pursuing all of these other foreign gods, these idols that were worthless. Now remember what I said in week 1 of this series, is that sometimes God uses these wait what moments in our lives to get our attention. Do you remember that? Well, that's what's about to happen in the life of Hosea. Verse 2, look at this. When the Lord spoke through Hosea, the Lord said to Hosea, go, take yourself a wife of whoredom and have children of whoredom, for the land commits great whoredom by forsaking the Lord. My goodness, this escalated quickly, didn't it? We're only, 2 verses in. That's a lot of whoredom. That's just embarrassing to say that many times in a sentence. So basically he's saying, God speaks to Hosea and says, I want you to marry a prostitute and have kids with a prostitute. Wait, what? I mean, for as much as God values marriage, for as much as God upholds and wants us to be pure in our sexuality, for as much as God upholds faithfulness in our relationships, why in the world would God tell one of his prophets to publicly take a prostitute as his wife? Now remember, we're looking for the why behind the weird. Okay, so here's the why. Listen up. God is calling Hosea to be a living parallel here. So what's going to happen with Hosea's life is he's going to ask him to trust God externally and show that to the people of Israel. So through the life of Hosea, God is going to get the attention of Israel to show them the consequences of their unfaithfulness. So with Hosea's life, his marriage, and his family, Hosea is going to be a living and breathing illustration of the unraveling relationship between God and Israel. Verse 3. So Hosea went and took Gomer, the daughter of Diblaim, and she conceived and bore him a son. Now, any of you expecting moms out here? Maybe you're expecting a daughter. You looking for some baby names? How about Gomer? No? Why is it? Okay. Nobody take her on Gomer. But I want you to pay attention, close attention to the names of what they named their children. This is significant, the why behind the weird. Verse 4, the Lord said to him, call his name Jezreel. For in just a little while I will punish the house of Jehu for the blood of Jezreel, and I will put an end to the kingdom of the house of Israel. And on that day I will break the bow of Israel in the valley of Jezreel. So Gomer here, she conceives and they had a son. And God tells Hosea to name his son Jezreel. Now this might not mean much to us today, but this is a huge, moment for Hosea. Because this isn't something that you would want to name your kid. If you were in his shoes, you wouldn't want to go there, because Jezreel in this time was a city with a long and violent history, especially towards the Hebrew people. So to give it some context today, this would be like a Jewish person today naming their kid Auschwitz. This would be like an American citizen naming their kid September 11th. And when you recall their name and you look at them, you're reminding yourself of terrible things in your past and in your history. And this is deeply rooted to the meaning that God is going to judge Israel. So verse 6, she conceived again and bore a daughter, and the Lord said to him, call her name Lo-ruhamah, for I will no more have mercy on the house of Israel to forgive them at all. So in line with Jezreel here, Lo-ruhamah is not a name that you would want to give to your daughter. So check this out. The word ruhamah means mercy or compassion. And lo is the negative in Hebrew. So her name literally means no mercy, no compassion, meaning this, that God will judge Israel with no mercy. Verse 8, when she had weaned Lo-ruhamah, she conceived and bore a son. And the Lord said, call his name Lo-ami, for you are not my people, and I am not your God. So Ami means my people. So his name means not my people. And what's happening here, this is a literal Jewish divorce decree. A husband would say this and the marriage would be over. So these are some really difficult, awful names to name your kids. Think about this for a second. You're getting ready for dinner, right? And you call the kids for dinner. Hey, God doesn't like you. Dinner's ready. Right? Think about it. Hey, terrible unfaithfulness. Make sure you wash your hands. Right? Hey, the one that doesn't belong to God. Hey, make sure you set the table. Right? See, these are some awful names. But we can still dig a little bit deeper here, because did you notice something significant? In verse 3, it says that Gomer bore him a son, Hosea, a son. But then for the last two, Did you notice that it simply said she conceived and bore a daughter and a son? Can you kind of catch the drift of what's happening with Gomer? Let me ask you a question today. I want you to think about your life for 1 second. What has been one of the most difficult moments in your life that you have had to endure because you made some really poor decisions? Or what moments in your life have you had to endure because other people around you were making some really bad decisions that were impacting you? So maybe for you it was a financial crisis because you made some really bad decisions and now you're digging out of debt. You know, maybe for you, you have made some really poor decisions that have led to some health issues. Or maybe you have some family or you see them making these decisions that are leading to these poor health issues. I don't know what it might be for you, but my guess is that for Hosea, this is his moment of the most deep pain as he's holding this baby. And he recognizes that the baby does not have his chin, doesn't have his eyes. In fact, this baby looks nothing like him, and then it dawns on him, these kids aren't even mine. And for Hosea, he begins to have an understanding here of how God must feel as it pertains to what Israel is doing to him. Because think about it, right? Humanity, you and I, since the beginning of time, humanity has chased after other lovers, trying to soothe our wounded souls. Maybe you've done this before. You've chased after things, like your career, like unhealthy relationships, like chemical addictions or screen addictions, all in an effort to fulfill us or to numb us from the pain. I mean, that's what we do, right? That's what Israel did. That's what Gomer did. In fact, she said in chapter 2, verse 5, she said that I will go after my lovers who give me my bread and my water and my wool and my flax, my oil and my drink. See, what's happening here is that she's finding her security for herself in these things that she thinks can keep her full and warm at night. Musician Derek Webb, he has a song entitled Wedding Dress that reflects this very passage and sentiment. He says this: I am so easily satisfied by the call of lovers less wild that I would take a little cash over your very flesh and blood. What a line, lovers less wild. You and I know this. They look so satisfying. They look like they can satisfy us, but in the end, they always leave us empty. Because it's not these other lovers who provide for us. They don't give us our bread and our drink. So therefore, God says in verse 8, she did not know that it was I who gave her the grain, the wine, the oil, and who lavished on her silver and gold, which they used for Baal, an idol, foreign god. Baal doesn't provide for you, God says. Your career won't care for you, God says. Your addiction can't love you. Verse 9, therefore, I'm going to take back my grain in its time and my wine in its season, and I will take away my wool and my flax, which were to cover her nakedness. So what God is telling Hosea here is that Israel, is that Gomer, remember they're one and of the same kind of illustration, that they are about to experience a very painful wait what moment in their lives because they have failed to realize that it was God all along who was taking care of them, not Baal. See, God basically says, I gave her all that she needed, but she gave credit to Baal, an empty and worthless idol. So now, I'm going to give her over to it. And I'm going to withdraw my blessing from her so that she can see how well these other pursuits are going to provide for her. Now, I need us to be careful here because we're in some dangerous theological territory here. I want you to hear this loud and clear, that notice that God is not withdrawing his blessing out of anger at her. See, no. God, his judgment upon Gomer, upon Israel, upon you and me, God's judgment is never meant to destroy us. It's meant to restore us back to him, to come home to him. It's not done out of anger. It's done out of his deep love for us. But you might know this, that with all these other pursuits of what we chase after and what we think that can satisfy us, it provides a constant ruckus in our ears and we're not able to hear the voice of God. We can't hear him. So sometimes he has to shout at us with these wait what moments to get our attention. And that's what he vows to do with Gomer, with Israel. Look at this. Therefore, I will hedge up her way with thorns, and I will build a wall against her so that she cannot find her paths. She shall pursue her lovers, but not overtake them. She shall seek them, but she shall not find them. God is going to cut her off from all of these other pursuits, and she's going to come to her senses. And here's what she's going to say. I will go then and return to my first husband, for it was better for me then than now. Does that sound familiar to you? If you know the Bible at all, does that sound familiar when Jesus actually used this as an illustration? When he told a story about a young man who had squandered all of his wealth chasing after all these other pursuits that he thought would satisfy him. And when all of it dried up, Jesus told the story like this. When he came to himself, he said, how many of my father's hired servants have more than enough bread, but I perish here with hunger? I will arise and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. And here's what God is saying to us this morning. If that's what it takes to get your attention, then I will allow you to be hurt deeply to bring you home. Not out of hate, but because I love you and I want you home where you belong. See, I will give you over to all those things that you want to pursue, and I will deprive you of my blessing because I love you that much. So I want you to think again about this most difficult moment in your life that you've ever had to endure. Did you ask the question in that moment when somebody else was making poor decisions or you were making poor decisions that left you in this awful moment? Did you ever ask the question, I know I have, God, where are you? Where are you? How could you allow this? Where are you? I want to submit to you today that perhaps God was closer than ever. In your deep pain, that's what he needed to do. That's what he allowed to happen so that he could gain your attention, to get you to stop chasing after all these other lovers that you think can satisfy you. And for him to get your attention, he had to strip you down. He had to strip them down completely. And if you're here today and you're in one of those moments right now where the world just seems upside down and you simply just don't understand what could be happening, the pain just seems unbearable to you, could it be that God is speaking to you? And he's saying, come home. Just come home. What happens next in this account of Hosea is absolutely beautiful. God says this in verse 14, therefore, behold, I will allure her. Remember, Gomer is Israel. I will allure her and bring her into the wilderness and speak tenderly to her. That word allure here in the original Hebrew is the word for seduce. That he's saying, I'm going to take her out into the wilderness. In other words, he's going to strip her of everything that she knows, all the distractions in her life, and he's just going to speak tenderly to her because he's finally got her attention, and he's going to remind her of his immense love for her. And he says, and in that day, verse 21, and in that day I will answer, declares the Lord. I will answer the heavens, and they shall answer the earth, and the earth shall answer the grain, the wine, and the oil, and they shall answer Jezreel. And I will sow her for myself in the land, and I will have mercy on Lo-Ruhamah. And I will say to Lo-Ami, you are my people. And he shall say, you are my God. See, friends, sometimes God has to allow these wait what moments. Sometimes he'll even cause them in our lives to strip us down, to remind us just how much he loves us and how much we cannot do this life without him, because he wants us to be back with him, home where we belong. So in chapter 3 of Hosea, as we turn the page, this is where we're going to find Gomer. This is where we find her. And God calls out to Hosea one more time, and he uses two incredibly powerful words that you need to hear today. Not just hear, you need to hear. He uses two very powerful words. He says, God said to Hosea, the Lord said to me, go again. Two massive words that are very important for how God sees you this morning. And in this particular context, he says, go again and love a woman who is loved by another man and is an adulteress, even as the Lord loves the children of Israel, though they turn to other gods and love cakes of raisins. So what's going on here? He's basically saying that Gomer, she flaunted all the goodness that you gave to her, Hosea. In fact, she laughed in your face as she ran off with all these other men. This cakes of raisin is a reference to them pursuing other gods. And so Gomer, she took the road of destruction all the way to the very end, and she has now found herself sick, spent, with no food, and she's now a slave. And listen what Hosea said. So I bought her. I bought her for 15 shekels of silver and of a homer and a lethek of barley. The original hearers of Hosea's account here, they would have connected the dots immediately of what this meant. Because if you look back in Exodus 21, you would know that this is a price of a worthless slave. A sick, worthless, can't do anything for you, sick and injured slave that nobody would want. That's the price. And so she had chased all of these other lovers and found that in the end that they did not give her the life that she thought that they would. In fact, they bound her and they sold her. And Hosea, he had a choice to make. Because back at this time, in this context, Hosea had the right to kill her. But grace said to love her. Nobody wanted her, but God said, I'll take her. She's mine. Why? Because I love her. I love Israel, my people. So Gomer, Israel, you or me, right? This is, we all have these moments in our lives where we are easily satisfied by the call of these lovers less wild. And maybe you're sitting here today and you're like, Pastor Kent, listen, you do not know my story. You don't know what I have done in my past. There is no way that God would want me like that. I mean, Pastor Kent, I have done some serious things in my past that I don't want anybody to know. And I'm telling you, God would not love me like that. And I'm just here to tell you the truth today. You're wrong. God does love you like that. And he does want you like that. The Bible puts it like this. God shows his love for us in that while we're still sinners, Christ died for us. And folks, that is the true wait what moment in the life of Hosea. That's when you discover God's depth of his love for you. When you begin to truly understand just how far God has gone for you and will go to rescue you, that will be the turning point of your life when you say, wait, what? God loves me like that? Yes, he does. The two words that God gives to Hosea, so powerful, go again, is the heartbeat of our God for you. How do I know this? Throughout history, he's gone again. See, when Adam and Eve turned their back on God, he said, I'm going again. See, when Israel rejected God after he freed them from slavery in Egypt, God said, I'm going again. When Israel demanded that a king would be over them instead of God leading them, God said, I'm going to go again. And when those kings led the nations away from God to pursue empty idols, he said, I'm going again. And when he sent prophets like Hosea to call out those that he loved and those people rejected him, God said, I'm going again. And when he sent his one and only son, Jesus Christ, to die on a cross to free us from our slavery of sin, it was proof that God is going to continue to go again and again and again. His proof is in his love for us. See, that's what it takes. This is the loyal and persistent love of a God that calls out to each and every one of us. Sometimes in our lives, it only takes a whisper. But sometimes it takes a shout of a wait what moment for God to get our attention. So what's it going to be for you? I realize that if you've just been joining us for maybe a couple months, or if this is your first time here today, that you don't really know me. So why should you take my word for it? So I thought as I kind of close the service today, I thought I'd tell you a little bit about me and something that happened to me. So I grew up in the church, and that meant I knew a lot about God. I knew the Bible stories, but I did not have a relationship with God. All the way through high school graduation and getting ready to go into college, I did not have a relationship with God. And so just to tell you, maybe give you a glimpse of the type of guy that I was as I entered into college, and as some of the girls who I went to high school with saw me beginning to hang out with Erica, who's now my wife, when they saw me trying to pursue her, they warned her. And they said, he's not a good guy, stay away from him. And they were right. I'm not proud of a lot of the things that I did back in those days. But something happened to me. And now that I look and think back, especially through the lens of this account that we just studied today, something happened upon graduation from high school and entering into college that God was actually beginning to isolate me out in the wilderness. Here's what he did. Basically, I was no longer hanging out with my buddies because I was working a lot, trying to save up money for college. I quit baseball, which I loved because I needed to work a lot to save up money for college. And so there was this one thing that my parents said, I've got to do. This summer, you've got to go with our church to this camp down in Orlando, Florida. And I was mad because none of my buddies were going. So I was sort of out there all on my own, none of my friends around me. And in that particular week, because my friends were not at the camp, I actually began to pay attention to the speakers at the camp that week. And they began to tell me of just how much God loved me and how much he had taken care of my past on the cross. And it was that week in Orlando, Florida, in 1995, that God got my attention. That was my wait, what moment. What am I doing with my life kind of moment. And God got through to me, this really hard heart, this angry Beaver County kid trying to get out of Pittsburgh. I was mad that I was going to a local college. I was upset. But God got through to this hard heart. And I surrendered to his love, to his mercy. And I came home spiritually that day by standing in a group of people, much like this, saying that I wanted to follow God. And I came home physically on a plane. And my parents will tell you that I was actually a very different person when I came home. And in fact, those girls will tell you they were on Erica's freshman floor that had once warned them that after they watched my life for a few months, they knew that I was very different, that something had happened to me. And here's the thing, God had changed my life. Nothing that I did, but God changed my life. And throughout that course of entering into college, then I made a vow to God that I would spend the rest of my life telling people about God's love that you and I do not deserve, but he gives it to us anyway. And he knows all of the things that I did in my past, and he loved me anyway. See, and when we study the scriptures like this and we figure out from these weird stories in the Bible that God actually loves us like that, I wonder if today might be some of your wait, what moments that God has been trying to get through to you for a long time, because he pursued me for an entire life, and finally I surrendered. And I thought that maybe today you might want to do the same. So I'm going to ask now that everybody just kind of close their eyes, bow your heads, let's pray together. And we're going to have a moment. Why do we do this? It's because we want to give you a moment between just you and God. A private moment where nobody's going to bother you. I just want to give you a moment where you can, between you and God, respond to this invitation of him saying, I'm going to go again and again and again until I get your attention to come home. And so if that's you right now and you want to make a decision to respond to God's love for the first time, listen, I'm talking about the first time. There are some of you that I see that in a moment like this, you think that you have to respond to this again as if it didn't take the first or the second time. I'm not talking to you right now. I'm talking to those of you who have never responded to this invitation before. To respond to God's love in your life because he sent Jesus on a cross to die for your sins, and by believing in him, he can wash your sin away. That's what I did that day in Florida. And so if that's you right now and you want to, for the first time, respond to that, on the count of 3, I'm just going to ask you to raise your hand. That's all I want you to do. Just want you to raise your hand. Okay, on the count of 3, if that's you, 1, 2, 3, raise your hand. Okay, I see those hands, right? I see those hands. For the first time, you're making this decision. Okay, you can put those hands down, okay? Life-changing moment right there that we're going to unpack in just a little bit. But there's a second group of people in this room right now. And you're here today, and let's be honest, you've made that decision before. You've responded to God's love and his forgiveness and his mercy before. But let's be honest, you and I are a lot like Gomer. Prone to wander, Lord, I feel it. Prone to leave the God we love. And there are many of you in this room that you have left God. It's not that you don't believe in him, but you've started to wander and chase after all these other things. And this is your day to come home. And so by way of recommitment here today, by saying, God, I'm sorry. I come back to you. I have sinned against you. Forgive me. If that's you, on the count of 3, then all I want you to do is raise your hand. 1, 2, 3. If that's you. Yeah, that's a lot of us in this room. It's many of us in this room. Go ahead and put your hands down.